Mike. All right, that's gonna have to do it for right now. All right, so we live. I'm gonna try my best not to be long, but like they always say, my brothers in the Nation of Islam say, I ain't gonna be long. I'm gonna try my best to be strong. I'm gonna keep this as quick and as informative as possible. I think it's very important that I answer a question that sometimes people might ask me. Why do you teach mindfulness? Why do you teach meditation in the first place? Why am I doing this? I have a business, trying my absolute best to get the word out, teach people mindfulness and meditation and show them how to control their mind, control their thinking processes. But why is this so important to me? And there's a whole story about how I used to work with kids in the community who ended up going to programs. There's a whole story about how I used to work with kids in a public school. I saw a lot of kids running around in that school who had undiagnosed mental health issues. But I want to go a little bit deeper than that. Today, I'm excited. I'm amped up. As y'all can see, my energy is on 100 right now. My swag is on 100 right now, man. I'm pumped up. So let's do this. I'm going to go hard on this one. Let's talk about the psychological war on the Black community. And let's talk about the history of people using psychology and pseudoscience as a means of stripping us of our humanity and excusing their inhumane treatment of us. Let's go a little bit deeper on this one. Let's go all the way back to the good old days. Let's go back to our ancestors and the pain our ancestors had to go through. In America, being a Black man, we are the descendants of slaves. We are the descendants of slaves, and our ancestors had to go through all kinds of inhumane treatment. But in order to justify the inhumane treatment, they had to use what they believed was science. The slave owners, the slave masters, individuals who advocated for slavery had to use psychology and pseudoscience as a means of justifying their hatred of us. So you had one man by the name of Samuel Cartwright, and he diagnosed a lot of slaves with a mental illness called drapetomania. Sounds stupid, right? Because it is. Drapetomania is a mental illness that makes slaves want to escape. So being a man and wanting to be treated like a human being and walking away from a situation or trying to escape a situation where you're being dehumanized made you a mentally ill person. It made you mentally ill to not want to be treated like a slave and be treated like a man. So the fact that you wanted to escape the plantation, he diagnosed you with a mental illness called drapetomania. Now, he had another mental illness called the dysesthesia and ethiopica. Dysesthesia ethiopica. What is that? Dysesthesia ethiopica is an illness that makes slaves lazy and dull with it, right? It makes slaves lazy and dull with it. So basically what he's saying is that if you were a slave and your body was run down and you were tired and you couldn't think because you had sleep deprivation, you were being malnourished, and you were being psychologically tortured. The result of that is a human being who has been broken. So the fact that you can't get up and walk, you can't think clearly, you can't communicate clearly, to him that was a mental illness. The slave masters weren't mentally ill for infecting this sickness on Black people. It was the slaves who were mentally ill by responding in this way to the dehumanization. So you had a justification for the mistreatment of Black people by this wacky pseudoscience. Right? These individuals who wanted to justify our dehumanization, they decided, you know what, we have to justify this using science. So they created their own fake pseudoscience. And the same thing is happening to this very day. Don't sound like this happened a long time ago and it's disgusting and it's shocking. The same thing is continuing to this very day. We're gonna go into all of that. I'm gonna keep this short. I ain't gonna be long, but I'm gonna be strong though. Now, I just found out about something that happened in the 1960s. In the 1960s, there was a place called the Ionia State Hospital in Ionia, Michigan, right? This was a hospital for mentally ill people. And a lot of individuals who went there, they would go there and they would be diagnosed. And once they got diagnosed, they would essentially live in this hospital long term. This is before deinstitutionalization, where people who have mental illnesses were kind of like ushered slowly but surely back out into the outside world so they can live their lives as best as they possibly can. In this case, individuals who had mental illnesses, they were all brought to this hospital. And a lot of times they would stay permanently. And what was happening in the 1960s is that they were diagnosing a lot of Black people with schizophrenia. Why were they diagnosing Black people with schizophrenia? Because Black people had the desire to be free. The 1960s, this was the height of the civil rights movement. So you had individuals who were African-American, Black people, our brothers, our sisters, struggling against oppression. And because they were fighting against oppression, they were all diagnosed with schizophrenia. Because at that point in time, the DSM, which is a diagnostical book that tells you what illness certain people have, because it gives you the indication of what diagnoses you might have. A lot of our brothers and sisters were victims of the fact that the DSM had just recently been changed. The DSM had recently just been changed so that individuals who were diagnosed with schizophrenia, one of the symptoms of schizophrenia was aggression, right? And another symptom I think of schizophrenia was irritability. So black people who were aggressive against white people for being their oppressors, they were diagnosed with schizophrenia. They were told that they were schizophrenic, and of course medicated and quote unquote treated. This was a form of dehumanizing black people. They wanted their freedom. They wanted to be treated like human beings. And you know what they got for it? They got diagnosed with schizophrenia and they were incarcerated. But don't think this is just something that only happens once in a while, because something like that happened recently. There was a woman who was very successful, driving a very successful car. She was driving a BMW or something like that. They snatched this sister up off the street, brought her to a mental health institution, and they said that she was crazy. They said, you're crazy because you're saying this really nice BMW is yours. That's impossible. They kept her incarcerated. I believe this happened in Texas. They kept her incarcerated for 3 days, forcing her to take psychotropic drugs because they felt that she had a mental illness and needed to be cured. And because the state law says that you can detain an individual for up to 72 hours or something like that, they kept this sister a prisoner and said she's mentally ill because she's driving a nice car that can't possibly be hers. And that's not something from the past. That's not something from the 1800s. It's not even something from the 1900s. That's something that happened in the 2000s, a couple of years ago. Understand what I'm saying? So this trend of incarcerating black people, penalizing black people because of our desire to be treated like human beings has always been a part of white supremacy and a part of oppressing black people. You can justify your oppression of black people if you can convince yourself that they are sick. That's a part of white supremacy, convincing yourself that the victims of white supremacy need it. They need it because they're sick. They can't take care of themselves. They can't function. They can't organize themselves. They can't do what we can do. So therefore, we have to justify our dehumanization of them because it's very, very important that we rule over them for their own sake. Rudyard Kipling referred to that as the white man's burden. It's the white man's burden that he got to take care of all these dirty, filthy, savage niggas, right? Let's continue. Now, I want y'all to remember that there's a organization called the APA, the American Psychological Association. When I was in college, I went and got my associates in psychology. When I was studying psychology, I had to refer to a lot of papers by the APA. The APA is one of the most powerful institutions in the United States of America. The American Psychological Association does a tremendous amount of research, and they are kind of like the gods of psychology research and psychology information. So if you ever need to do a research paper, you ever need to go into facts and statistics about mental health, chances are you're going to come across the APA. Now, in the 2000s, during the War on Terror, the APA actually did something that was very unethical. And I want you to understand this. I want you to know this because it's very important that you understand who you're dealing with in the U.S. when you're talking about mental health. The APA was a part of the torture program, the enhanced interrogation program run by the United States government. The United States government was torturing human beings, dehumanizing human beings in the Abu Ghraib and other black ops sites around the world. And they were doing it with the help of the APA. There was actually an investigation of what was happening. And it's called the Hoffman Report, done by, I believe the man's name is Anthony Hoffman. He was an attorney who was hired to do an independent investigation on what was happening because people were being so dehumanized, tortured, killed, sexually humiliated, beaten. They were being fed rectally. So that means that instead of them eating with their mouths, a lot of times the individuals would say, you know what, I'm not going to eat until you treat me like a person. And I'm not trying to glorify the individuals being tortured. I'm not trying to say that these terrorists were heroes or anything of that nature. But the truth is the truth. These individuals are being tortured and dehumanized with the help of the APA, the American Psychological Association. So it's very important that you understand that you're dealing with individuals who are not necessarily the most ethical people in the world. And when you're studying what the APA is capable of, you realize that quite often they can be complicit in America's war, psychological war on black people. A lot of these institutions, a lot of these hospitals, a lot of these universities, a lot of these schools are complicit in the psychological war against black people. Don't ever think that just because an institution is popular, just because they have authority, just because they have some money, and just because you might use their information and their research to write a college paper, that don't necessarily mean you're dealing with good people. And it don't mean that you're dealing with individuals. Just because an individual is a scientist doesn't mean they're egalitarian. Remember that. Just because a person is a scientist doesn't mean that they have ethics. I was always a person who believed that if an individual has knowledge, then that's going to make him less likely to be unjust. And We were way wrong about that. I just read some of the stuff that was being done to some of the individuals who were the victim of the enhanced interrogation program. Sickening. And they said they destroyed all the evidence because the videotapes, they said if the videotapes get out to the public, it'd be so shocking and so disturbing that the CIA would never recover from that. So they said, you know what, we'd rather take the heat from destroying the records and destroying the information as opposed to taking the heat to having people watch and see what we did. That's how shocking and how crazy it is, right? Let's move on. Now, the same thing in a lot of ways is happening to our children in schools. Quite often, Black children are routinely, they don't get the psychological support that they need. They're more likely to be untreated, undiagnosed, unsupported, and more likely to be penalized. So you have young Black kids, and I used to work at a school, and praise be to the individuals who I worked with who were on top of their game and they were on the ball. They would have kids in their classrooms who had seen gun violence, kids who had seen their mothers get abused, kids who had seen death and abuse and aggression all their lives. They come to school and act out in the school. And instead of teachers and social workers saying, hey, you know what, I think this kid might need some help and some support, quite often these kids would just get punished. And there were some teachers, there were some people who were great and they would help. I mean, I worked with a guy, some people didn't like him, but the principal, Leonardo Watson, great guy. As far as I know, I would talk to him about certain things that I'd see in the school, and he would already be on the ball trying to help the family out. He would say, oh yeah, I know that young person, I'm helping their family now. We're working with the family now. You know, if there's anything that you see, just let us know. And he was, as far as I know, he was always on top of his game as far as making sure that the students got everything that they needed. Salute to him. I haven't seen him in a while, but salute to that brother. And salute to all the really good teachers out there, great people out there who stayed on top of trying to help these students deal with their issues. Because a lot of times these kids had serious mental health issues. And as I started studying more and more, I started seeing a lot of these kids were struggling with depression, struggling with anxiety, struggling with PTSD. You could see the symptoms as soon as they walk in the room. If you know a few of the symptoms, you can identify automatically, okay, something's not right here. But instead of these kids getting the help that they needed and the concern that they needed, sometimes they would just get penalized. They'd get, reports written about their behavior. They would get, kicked out of the classroom, suspended, all kinds of things would happen. And sometimes, yes, I understand. I'm not saying that sometimes it's not necessary to remove a kid who's troubled from an environment where you're trying to educate. I'm not knocking that. But what I'm saying is that quite often, a lot of times, Black kids might not get the help they fully need. And shout out to the teachers who are putting that help out there for them. And this is a part of a continuum of a system that routinely ignores the psychological needs of Black children. And that's why they call it the school to prison pipeline. Because there is a system that you'll notice from a very early age, certain kids with behavioral issues, they get pushed along and pushed along and pushed along. Kids with learning disabilities get pushed along until they just age out of school, or they get kicked out of school, or they just stop coming because the effort is not worth the reward they're going to get. So these kids are highly unsupported, sometimes highly unsupported by the school, but I can't say I've seen that, but I've heard of instances and I've seen certain things, sometimes not supported by the community in the proper way. It's happening. It happens on a routine basis, happens consistently. So what are we going to do? These children are the victims of trauma, victims of violence, and victim of the number one thing, racism. Nobody takes into account how racism is basically traumatizing. The psychological war on young Black kids is the result of racism, and they have to deal with this racism on a daily basis. Television, radio, news, all day, every single day. And not only are they dealing with this all day, every single day, but it's so stressful to them and so hurtful to them that after a while it leads to comorbidities and they start to mentally break down. Rates of young Black boys committing suicide are rising. Rates of young Black girls engaging in drug use rising. And then on top of that, just like before, you have Black people being misdiagnosed with make-believe mental illnesses. And I'm going to say this and make some people mad. I don't care. That it's the same thing is still continuing to this day. We're being falsely diagnosed with mental illnesses that are not real. Like toxic masculinity. That sounds like a very important, very powerful term, but it's not a mental illness. You can't diagnose an individual with toxic masculinity because it's not a mental illness. There's no mental illness called toxic masculinity, and nobody in the Black community really understands it, but we throw the term around left and right. So you have individuals being labeled as toxic masculines for being masculine. Imagine if you're a young boy and you hear somebody say toxic masculine. It's going to sound like just the act of being male in and of itself is toxic. So these make-believe mental illnesses are being thrown at our children, and it's hurting them. It's hurting our children when you tell a kid the term toxic masculine. I don't care what anybody says. You debate, you doubt it, it's fine. Let's debate it. Let's debate it in an intellectual fashion. Let's debate it in an intellectual fashion. Put your emotions aside, bang out with me mentally. Toxic masculinity is hurt. Just that term is hurtful to young black boys. There's another thing, adjustment syndrome, which gets thrown around a lot. There's a lot of young boys with behavioral issues. They don't know what's the cause of the issue, and they don't want to deal with the cause of the issue. They don't want to acknowledge the fact that the young man is being raised in an environment without his father figure. He's being raised in an environment where he's surrounded by violence, being raised in an environment where he's surrounded by drug use. That's going to wear down on any child's mind. But instead of dealing with the community issues, it's easier to say he has adjustment syndrome or label him with some other illness, ADHD or whatever, and just toss him aside. And then another one or two more, I'll give you two more that are not mental illnesses that get thrown at black people, especially young black children nowadays. Homophobia and transphobia. Show me in the DSM where it says homophobia or transphobia. And then when I ask individuals to explain what it is, because I've had that thrown at me one time, because I was saying that homophobia is not a major issue in the black community, and I had somebody dispute that online, and I said, okay, well, how do you define homophobia, just so we're clear in the terms? And the individual said that homophobia is when black men, don't know why, just men, black men are dismissive of homosexuals. Dismissive. That don't sound like a mental illness. Dismissive. We're dismissive of homosexuals. Not that we want to hurt homosexuals, not that we want to kill anybody, not that we're afraid of them, because the term homophobia means afraid of homosexuals. But we're dismissive. Nobody has given me a clear definition of what homophobia means, but black men are typically labeled as homophobia and transphobia. And the major threat with this is the fact that it's just another fake mental illness that you can label black people with and treat us in a certain way based upon the label. When Genuine, the singer, was on that reality show, what happened? There was a trans person who tried to put their arms around him and kiss him. He didn't want the kiss. He didn't want the physical contact. He was immediately labeled as transphobic. He didn't try to hurt the person. He didn't say or do anything disrespectful. He just was guarding his space, which any human being would do. I'm a man. I'm a kind of big guy. So if I get too close to a woman and she feels uncomfortable and she's like, yo, back up, that don't mean she's heterophobic, does it? She's owning her space, and I respect that. I respect anybody who wants to own their space and who's clear about that. That's not a bad thing. You're not an evil person. You're not a bad person because you're owning your space. But because Genuine is a black man, he gets labeled as transphobic. I don't want nobody I don't know coming up to me and kissing me on the mouth. I don't want nobody I don't know coming up to me and trying to grab me and behave in a way as if they have ownership of my body. But because Genuine was a black man, he got labeled with this fake mental illness of transphobia. And this is a way for individuals to control us. If I label you as homophobic because you don't do what I say, then that's a way for me to control you. And we see this happen all the time with black celebrities. We see this happen all the time with individuals who have their own thoughts, have their own ideals. They get labeled with homophobia because they won't behave in a certain way. I almost dropped my light. Got too much going on here. You don't behave the way I want you to behave, then I'll give you this label. This is a means for me to control you. And any black person who wants real, true black empowerment, you have to understand you can't let anybody, even if you're of the LGBT community. I definitely understand individuals in the LGBT community want to be treated like human beings. I get it. I'm with you. I want us all to get what we deserve. I want us all to be treated like humans. But at the same time, you're not going to get what you want in a just way by throwing around labels to try to get other people to submit to your behavioral demands. It's not real. You show me the statistical data that talks about homophobia, and statistical, not emotional, not anecdotal. Not, hey, I got a friend who my cousin said, no, show me real statistical data that shows any of that. Nobody's studied it yet. Nobody's done no research on it yet, but it's a label that's pervasive in the Black community, because anybody who wants Black men to behave a certain way, or Black people in general to behave a certain way, they can throw that label around. You're homophobic. You're transphobic. How? What did I do to you? Because a mental illness is not about what you don't do, is it? It's about what you do. I guess. Maybe I'm wrong. But you show me the data. I don't debate with anybody anymore. I want two things. Either you show me the data or you show me the results. You don't have the results, I don't want to hear it. You don't have the data, I don't want to hear it. There's a psychological war going on against Black people. We must see things as they truly are. We must claim your mind. Claim your ancestry. Claim your power. If you can't claim your mind and know who you truly are, what could you possibly do to change the reality around you? What? Tell me. What can you hope to accomplish if you can? And that's why I teach mindfulness and meditation. I teach mindfulness and meditation because I want Black people to be trained to control their emotions, so they won't be blinded by their trauma anymore. So they won't be triggered. Every time you see something on TV, you get triggered and you got to respond and you freak out and you got to act before you think. You can't be strategic and traumatized. You can't be strategic and sick. You can't be strategic and a slave to your desires and a slave to your emotions. And every single day you're being fed fake empowerment, my people. Fake empowerment. I want you to have real power. Stop debating over nonsense that don't make no sense. Stop debating over emptiness. And I want you to fight for real power. The debates are over. We're done with the debates. I don't debate no more. Show me the math or you show me the results. If not, if you don't have the math to prove your point, the research to prove your point, or the results to prove your point, then just sit back and try to learn. And I'm not saying from me, but I'm saying get the information. But it's hard to do that when so many of us get triggered and so many of us don't have the ability to see things as they truly are. That's why I teach mindfulness and meditation as a means of learning how to control everything that's happening inside. There's so much going on inside with mental illness and PTSD, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideations, homicidal ideations, anger issues, depression. Trust me, I've been through it all. I've been through all of that stuff. And with depression, anxiety, PTSD, you name it, I've been there. All of that stuff distorts your perception of reality. You can't live your life and make decisions and change your environment if you're sick and you don't have the coping skills, not coping mechanisms, coping skills so that you can handle what's in front of you. If you can't have a positive relationship with other individuals because your anxiety is too intense, your depression is too intense, your low self-esteem is too intense, you can't build a future for your kids. That's the thing that I regret the most, is dealing with anxiety and depression for so many years that it slowed down the rate at which I can produce for my kids. I'm trying my best to be on my game now and be more productive now, but I'm thinking if I had got my mind right when I was 21 after my dad died. Let's say my dad died when I was 21. I got my mind right, immediately going to therapy, immediately handling stuff, immediately addressing my drinking issue. If I had done all that back then, imagine where I'd be now at the age of 41. 20 years later. Imagine how much further along the line I would have been. But struggling alone, coping with coping mechanisms, as opposed to coping skills, has brought to so much wasted energy in my life. So much self-destructive tendencies. So many mistakes. When you can see things as they are, you're less likely to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But if you make an informed mistake, at least you can bounce back a little bit faster from that. When you make uninformed mistakes, uninformed errors, or errors that are informed by your mental illnesses and your comorbidity and your addiction, it puts you further back. And thank God, things could have went real left for me on many occasions. Thank God I survived all of that. And now I got my seeds. I'm happy. I'm building. I'm moving forward. And that's what I want for all my people. And meditation was a major part of that. Mindfulness was a major part of that. I used to have panic attacks. Now imagine if I used to have panic attacks seeing the things that I saw as a young child. Imagine how many other tough guys in the hood are having panic attacks. And something goes wrong, something goes left, they respond with anger, they're ready to fight at the drop of a dime. It's not because they're just angry and aggressive guys. It's because maybe they're going through depression. Maybe they're struggling with anxiety. Maybe they're having a panic attack. A lot of these young kids who reaching for the gun immediately and they'll blow somebody's brains out in a heartbeat. A lot of them kids are they dealing with panic attacks. They're dealing with anxiety. These kids running around popping pills and drinking at an early age, they're dealing with anxiety. Maybe it's social anxiety. Maybe it's the anxiety that's the result of witnessing something traumatic. But a lot of you don't behave in a dysfunctional way like so many people in our community unless there's a mental health issue behind it. And yes, there are some individuals who they might not have a mental health issue, but maybe they've been desocialized, but that's a minority. Somebody who just got ignorant parents who just raised them ignorant as hell, that's a minority. Dysfunctional behavior is the result of dysfunctional thinking. And dysfunctional thinking can be addressed with therapy, with mindfulness, and with meditation. I don't teach mindfulness and meditation because I think it's cute. A lot of people see it as something luxurious and something fun that you can engage in as a way of relaxing. Yeah, I want you to relax, but I want you to have power. Real power, not fake power. Not fake power. I don't want you to have no fake power no more. They tell you that voting was power. It's not no power for you. They told you that having a whole bunch of sex with a bunch of people is power. It's not no power for you. Where's your power? Where's your power? I just heard about a little kid who was in a mostly white school, young black kid, killed himself because of the stress of being called a nigga and a monkey all day. Where's your power? Where's your hot girl power? Where's your tough guy gangster power? Where's your twerking power at? Where's your G'd up power at? You a G, right? Y'all G's, right? Where your power at? You can't even save your babies. And I'm not saying that to degrade you, but I'm saying we got to get our mind right. So meditation and mindfulness sounds like we're slowing down. But I approach this with a strong sense of urgency. We got to get on the ball. We got to get on the ball now. The only way we can make the world a better place is if we make ourselves better within. As above, so below, as within, so without. The most honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches, seek yourself in heaven at once. We can have heaven right now. But it all begins in the mind. So if you don't learn how to control your mind and balance your mind and control your behavior and control your emotions, what are you going to do? What's your plan for the future? Because you can't wild out in every situation and think you're going to do anything. What you going to do? If you can't gain control of yourself, how can you gain control of your life and your situation? And then gain control of your family? And then gain control of your community? And then gain control of the political situation of black people across the country, then across the world? What's your plan? If your plan don't include developing yourself, developing your mind to a higher level, developing discipline, getting your body right, if it don't include that, what are you doing? You can't save anyone when your behavioral patterns are self-destructive. You can't do nothing for nobody if you can't do nothing for yourself. My father taught me that. When I was very young, I was one of them selfless kids that felt like you always have to do everything for everybody else. My father told me you can't take care of nobody else till you take care of number one. And at first I thought, yeah, he's being selfish. Then I realized he's being wise. Sometimes wisdom is just harsh. Sometimes it's harsh to be a wise individual. Sometimes you gotta be cold. Like King Solomon. Like King David. You gotta be cold. And you got to learn to be cold by cooling your emotions. Cool the fire of your emotions. And you learn that through mindfulness and meditation. Now, if you come to this channel, you happen to stumble across my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is The Wellness Initiative. I got probably like 100 videos up there. I have 3-minute meditations. I have longer guided meditations. I have videos about depression, anxiety, history, mindfulness, mysticism. Got it all. And I'm not saying it to boast or brag or nothing like that. But it's there for you if you need it. And I'm going to just keep making more of these because it's very important that we empower ourselves. You got to empower yourself within first. Peace and blessings to everybody. Talk to y'all later.